Hey, my name is Thomas, and today let's talk influential, important, famous cameras. Cameras that really influenced the way how photography evolved. Cameras that made an impact on how we really see the world. I'm gonna do a top 5 list. That's my first top 5 list, and it's gonna be the top 5 most influential, most important cameras of the last 100 years. So I know there's room for debate, and not every camera that's important can be in such a short list, but I hope you're gonna like my choice, and I also try to be not too obvious, so it's not just like a Rolleiflex, Hasselblad, and then maybe Canon and Nikon. I try to steer a little bit off the beaten path as well in my choice, so let's start. So I just said I'm not gonna go for the most obvious choices to make it a little bit more interesting, but nonetheless my number one, I'm going from the old to the new cameras here. Number one has to be the Leica. I'm sorry guys, there's just no denying that this is maybe the one most influential camera of all times, sort of. The Leica came on the market in 1925, and it already had all the credentials of a modern camera, you know, all the stuff that we're talking today about, like full frame 36 by 24 millimeter, 50 millimeter standard lens, the size of the camera, the handholdability, the fact that you have a system camera where you can change the lenses and all that, it was there in the Leica. It's just a legend. In 1931, actually, the Model 1 was, the Leica 1 was sort of updated to include the M39 screw mount that people can still use today. So it became an interchangeable lens camera. And from then on, yeah, it's just a blueprint of every modern camera ever made since then. So I had to include it in my list, I'm sorry. What I also want to do is I want to always quote one important photographer that was using the camera that made it into my list, just, yeah, out of interest. With a Leica, it's sort of hard to make a choice really, because yeah, I mean, every famous photographer was using a Leica. And of course, like, I don't know, Robert Capa, Henri Cartier-Bresson, David Seymour, Andreas Feininger, all these super great names of modern photography, they were using Leica cameras, so you know them all. If you're really new to photography and photographic history, just check out what these guys did. But okay, I don't want this to be just a list of men, so I selected a women photographer, and there's a very influential and important women photojournalist of the 1930s, and that's Gerda Taro. Sadly, she died very early. During the Civil War in Spain, during her work. She was born in 1910, died in 1937, so at an age of only 27 years. And what's important to know is that actually she was working together with Robert Capa, the super famous photojournalist, very closely, and a lot of his super early work actually was done by her, because they both sort of used the name Robert Capa more as a brand name. And then after she died very early, he would carry on, of course. But yeah, Gerda Taro, super influential, very early Leica photographer. Check out her work. So now we come to number 2, and actually I'm cheating a little bit, but I wanted to have the obvious choice up front, and now something more interesting. But this camera is even older than the Leica. It came on the market in 1924 already. And the camera I'm talking about is the Amanox. And the Amanox, what's so influential about that camera? Well, it's the first camera on the market that you could use to take low light candid shots. You could not just use it during daylight without a tripod, but even in the evenings or indoors. That's such a huge thing in photography. You didn't need a tripod and a huge flashlight or something. You could take photos sort of unnoticed, indoors, at important events, or at your home or something like that. Wow, that was something super new. And the Amanox was used by a very, very famous photographer, and that's Erich Solomon. I've got a book. Check out his work. He's very, very well known for traveling to a lot of political places. He has been in cabinets or invited to, I don't know, kings and queens and prime ministers of the world. And most of his work is also from the 1930s, so it was a very important time in history, a little bit also of a dark time, really. And Erich Solomon, he lived in Germany. He was a Jewish. He was a Jew. So he was actually killed by the Nazis in 1944. The darkest chapter maybe of modern history. Nonetheless, his photography just stays on and is hyper influential because he was the first to go, to a parliament and just take candid shots of the politicians talking, and there were very, very important events. And every other photographer back then, when they wanted to have a photo, they had to ask the politicians, they had to pose for the photo, and then there came the flash gun and stuff like that. You couldn't just take a candid shot that like it is normal today. The Amanox, the camera itself, it was using I think 6.5 by 4 centimeter medium format film. It's a slightly different format to what we're used today in a Hasselblad, for example. And it had an f2 lens, 100 millimeters, sort of very short telephoto, but f2, wow, that was something incredible at the time. Was designed by Ludwig Bertele, who also did later the Sonar and all these uber famous lenses. But this lens, the Anostar, used in the Amanox, was the first of these hyper fast lenses that are all the craze today and that are used to take low light candid shots. That was the purpose of these lenses, to enable you to take photos in a situation where it wasn't possible before. So the influence of the Amanox cannot be overestimated. Even though the camera was never a huge success or something, and it's not that well known, it was hyper influential. So let's move on to number 3, and that's the Argus C3. Now I hear you ask, what the fuck? And I'm saying, yeah, this is a very, very important influential camera because it was a mass-produced camera. The Argus C3, it's called the Brick. I think most of you in the States will know this thing, and the rest of the world maybe not that well known. It was made from 1939 through 1966, and they sold 2 million copies of this camera. It was basic, yes, it was a rangefinder camera, at least, and it had a standard lens 50mm, not interchangeable. The point of this camera was you could take very good photos with this thing, and you didn't have to, pay an arm and a leg to just get one. And many people use these cameras to just document their everyday life, like what we do today, but back then it was something sort of new for the mass. And of course also important and famous photographers use this camera. Like Tony Vaccaro, for example, he took a lot of photos in the late Second World War. He was a soldier in Europe fighting for the Allies, and he documented he documented what was going on there. His photos, he took several thousand photos in the last years, like 1944 and 1945 of the war, and they are considered to be the most close-up work that was done in the Second World War, sort of a documentation really. And later, after the war, he stood in Germany for another 4 years and documented the life of the people after the war, so in a very, very turbulent and hard time. Very important photographer. Then later he went to America and became a fashion photographer, but I'm sure he wasn't using the Brick, the Argus C3 anymore. Whatsoever, a very, very influential camera. It brought photography to the masses. What can I say? It's Friday, it's 4 o'clock, time for a beer. Cheers. Let's move to number 4, and that's obvious again. I'm sorry, but it has to be that way. The Nikon F. That's a camera, it came on the market in 1959, and since then photography hasn't been what it has before. The Nikon F is the prototype of the modern huge system camera. The system of the Nikon F was so much bigger even than the Leica system. Yeah, hard to believe. They incorporated autofocus, electronic exposure, electronic aperture control, all that stuff later into this same bayonet mount that the Nikon F started. But even the Nikon F from 1959, it was already a super capable camera. It was really a high-tech camera. It had the shutter blades made from titanium foil, not just cloth like Leica or something. The Nikon F is just a legend in its own right. And there was an old advert from Nikon that said, wherever a record is being broken, a Nikon F is at hand. That's absolutely true. From telephoto to wide angle, ultra wide, fisheye, underwater, in space, everywhere a Nikon F was used. The Nikon F also, by the way, it's the only of the 5 cameras. No, it's not true. There's another camera I also own myself. But the Nikon F is a camera that I owned myself, and I used it for over 10 years. It was, yeah, a legend. And now number 5, the last one, very obvious. Sorry, but also it can't be different. The iPhone. Yes, there I said it. I love this sort of cameras. I'm a guy for system cameras, for real cameras, but nonetheless, the iPhone is the last most influential camera of the world. It changed the way how photography works in such a big way because it is connected to, you know, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever, you name it, 500 pixel. Anyone remembers that? It has to be one of the most influential cameras of the world. The iPhone came on the market in 2007, called the iPhone 3, and the big thing about it is not the camera. The camera back then was really crappy. The big thing is how you would use it, and that it was connected to the internet with a smart. Yeah, it was also the first smartphone. It's not just influential as a camera, but as the whole product is super influential. And photographers are using it. So many today. It's even harder to pick than ever before. Let's go for Ben Lowy. I think that's a very important point that he made. He's also a war photographer, and he started using the iPhone instead of Canon or Nikon cameras because it was so unobtrusive, so small. People wouldn't just think, wow, there comes the photographer with a huge camera. No, they were like, oh, it's just an iPhone. Maybe he's going to take, you know, a snapshot. It's quick, it's unobtrusive, it can be hidden away. It's just, it changes photography in so many ways. And that guy, he's really concentrating on that change. And in a way, he's repeating the same idea of the original Leica from 1925, that you could bring a small, unobtrusive camera and you didn't have to set up anything, something big. You wouldn't draw attention, you just got the shot and then you walked away very quickly. That's the point of the iPhone, and it was the point of the Leica. And that's also how you see that history is repeating, but also adding a lot of new stuff. That makes it so interesting, right? One thing is, of course, I'm just noticing, I had like 3 wartime photographers in my list. It says a lot about the world, really. But okay, it was influential photography, and maybe war is fueling it in a way that people react, or I don't know. Let's hope for more peaceful times then. So yeah, that's my top 5 list of the most influential cameras. I hope you liked it. Maybe you have got some other suggestions or ideas, then write something in the comment section below. I know there are so many other important great cameras out there that maybe if I could have made a top 20 list, really, no problem there. Also, there are so many famous photographers. I can only give a very small idea about that. Anyway, I hope you liked it. I hope to see you on the next video. If you haven't done so yet, then subscribe to my channel if you like my work. It's always a great help. I appreciate your support so very much. It's so much fun to do this. So yeah, stay healthy, have a good time, and see you on the next video. Bye.